Okay, our next topic is local government annexations. And we have joining us today Jill Dvorkin from MRSC, Alan Bosick from the county planning, who is the county planning manager from Pierce County, and then Carl Schrader from the AWC. Thank you all for being here. I know this is a very meaty topic, which will probably be shown and proved out when we get into the question segment of this, but welcome, and I believe Jill is first up.
Yes, thanks so much, Representative Durr, and thanks for having us here today before the committee. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have a few slides to go through. Okay. Is everyone seeing that okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Again, good afternoon. Thank you for having us here, and we're going to just talk briefly through kind of where things stand with annexations in Washington State and what some of the barriers may be to cities moving forward with annexations. Again, my name is Jill Dvorkin. I am a legal consultant at MRSC. My fellow panelists today are Alan Bosick from Pierce County. He's a long-range planning manager there. And again, Carl Schrader, who's the Deputy Director of Government Relations at AWC. And I'm going to very briefly cover the following topics: some annexation basics, relevant statutes related to annexation, a very high-level overview of the different annexation methods available in Washington State, some statistics, so annexation by the numbers, and just briefly touch on the challenge of achieving the goals of the Growth Management Act using the annexation and other tools available under state law. Following my presentation, Alan will discuss some observations, challenges, and recommendations based on his experience in Pierce County. And Carl will follow Alan with some additional observations based on his experience working closely with cities throughout the state. So here are some high-level basics about annexation. I think it's important to remember that annexations ultimately, all annexation methods, regardless of whether by petition, election, or interlocal agreement, are ultimately a legislative decision. In other words, city council approval or town council approval is required at some stage of the process as a precondition to moving forward with any of these methods. If we're talking about a GMA planning jurisdiction, all annexed lands must be within an urban growth area. Any lands proposed to be annexed to a city must be contiguous to that city boundary, unless it's a municipal purpose annexation, in which case the contiguous requirement is not there. It can be for like a city park or a city facility. Annexations are exempt from SEPA review. Some, but not all, annexation methods are subject to review by an a boundary review board, and that is if there is one established in the applicable county. There are increasingly fewer boundary review boards around the state. Part of this is by design. When the GMA was passed, the idea was that this planning framework would kind of obviate the need for that additional layer of review by the Boundary Review Board. But nevertheless, there are still boundary review boards throughout the state, and if the annexation method provides for a review, then it would be subject to review by that board. Just an aside that there is no process in state law to change county boundaries. And finally, all annexations must be certified by the Office of Financial Management, and this is for purposes of tracking population. There are many statutes related to annexation and or changing municipal boundaries. The primary two related to annexations are Chapter 3513 RCW and 35A14. 35A14 is focused on code cities, and then 3513 all other cities and towns. Chapter 3502 relates to the initial incorporation of a city, so it's independent of annexation. And a new incorporation hasn't happened in Washington State in some time. Chapter 3510 RCW addresses both the consolidation of two or more cities or towns, or the annexing of one part of one city or town into another city. Chapter 3516 and 35A16, those relate to reducing city boundaries. Some call that de-annexation. Finally, Chapter 3693 RCW relates to the boundary review boards. And here are the several annexation methods in Washington State. There are multiple methods available. I've highlighted the most frequently used here. Traditionally, the most frequently used has been the 60% petition method, where initially a petition showing 10%, they call it a 10% petition, goes before the local government, and then if they say yes, move forward, then there needs to be 60% of a 60% threshold to be met in order to proceed with the annexation. More recently, the interlocal agreement methods have become more popular. What you'll see is the smaller maybe a few parcels adjacent to a city, a few landowners, they might submit the 60% petition method type of annexation to proceed, whereas maybe like for larger annexations that are intended to kind of grab more of the urban growth area as part of an overall plan, more and more those are being done using the interlocal agreement methods available. So I'm highlighting two of the recently adopted interlocal agreement methods on this slide. These were adopted in 2021 and 2020, respectively. Both are only available to code cities. And both require various preconditions to be met before annexation can occur. So that first one on the left, 472, it requires a very robust public participation and notice requirements. The ILA must address a balance of commercial, industrial, and residential properties so that there's a full understanding of the tax revenue impacts related to the annexation. The ILA must also address infrastructure as well as potential revenue sharing. And this is just a high-level summary of the requirements. 35A14-296 is another of these ILA methods. This one requires written notice to impacted special purpose districts and any adjacent cities that may be part of this annexation area. And it must give those entities an opportunity to join the interlocal agreement. And if any of the impacted districts or the city disagree with the annexation, this method cannot be used. Public hearings are required by each legislative body, and a condition of this type is that no change in residential zoning within that annexed area may occur for 5 years. So in addition to these two ILA methods, there are ILA methods related to sort of the unincorporated island, which is kind of where it's largely already surrounded by city boundaries, as well as for annexations of areas served by fire districts. So I asked our research analyst at MRSC, Steve Hawley, to look at the numbers put out by OFM, or Office of Financial Management. And this chart shows the number of annexations per year for the last 5 years based on the effective date of annexation. And it shows how many cities and towns were involved with the annexations. So that demonstrates that maybe one city or town might have had multiple annexations in one calendar year. And this chart shows the total population and acreage impacted by municipal annexations per year, also using that OFM data. This means that the total number of residents who live in all the annexed areas combined for each of those years is included in this chart, as well as the total acreage. And for the 2024 numbers, Steve did include a population of 1,282 that was part of the Auburn and Kent kind of boundary line, where I think Kent absorbed some of the population, or Auburn took some of the population of Kent, and they moved the city boundaries. So as you can see, the overall impact of the annexations of the last 5 years, at least according to this data, has been minimal in terms of moving population numbers from unincorporated areas to incorporated areas. I am aware, however, that several larger scale annexations have either been locally adopted or in process. For example, there's North Lake annexation near Snohomish, Washington, the South annexation area in Oak Harbor. There's a large 1,200-acre area near Yelm, another one that's been in the news near Chehalis. So I don't know that it reflects kind of the current movement towards some of these larger scale interlocal agreement annexations. Here are just some metrics from MRSC. As you know, we serve local governments around the state. We looked at kind of how popular the annexation was in terms of a search term on our website. It looks like we've had a little over 1,000 searches on our website in the last 2 years that uses annexation as a term. Additionally, we have an internal research database that shows our, what questions have been asked to us, and at least about 25 a year come in related to annexation, but that's not reflective of all of them. We have several hundred, and at least 300 mention both annexation and interlocal. This is just, if you wanted to click on these slides, if you have a copy, some annexation and incorporation in the news. And finally, to the challenge, the premise of the Growth Management Act was that urban growth should occur in urban areas, in other words, cities, where municipal services can be efficiently provided. And ideally, existing cities grow in a coordinated manner to accommodate this new growth. And while cities and counties may want to fulfill this promise, the reality on the ground is often different. While growth is certainly occurring in unincorporated urban growth areas, often the statutory toolbox and incentives for cities to annex seems to be mismatched with the realities on the ground. So this is just a quote from one of our inquiries that came in, kind of acknowledging the struggles faced in these unincorporated areas. And finally, I will say thank you, and feel free to ask questions, but I'll go ahead and move this over to Alon. He has a lot of insight to share. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair and Committee.
I do see a question. Should I take that now or wait till the end of the panel?
Let's wait till the end of the panel, please.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Good afternoon, Chair, committee members.
Okay.
Appreciate the opportunity to be with you today. Alon Basak, County Planning Manager for Pierce County. I'm going to start with a very brief introduction of Pierce County and why it matters that we are here with you today. Pierce County is the second largest jurisdiction by population size, and I mean that in two different ways. We are second largest with about 1 million people behind King County and county in its entirety. We are the second largest also as a jurisdiction overall. We have 450,000 people in unincorporated Pierce County. That makes us second only to city of Seattle in terms of population size. And a lot of that area is, well, really rather urban. For context, King County has 250,000 as compared to our 450,000 in unincorporated King County with roughly 2.5 million. So they have 1 in 10 residents living in the unincorporated area as opposed to 1 in 2. For more context, Clark County has 245,000 people in their unincorporated area as opposed to 542,000 overall, so a little bit closer to our makeup of 1 in 2, but there's a lot of people living in unincorporated urban areas. During our comprehensive plan for 2024, we took a hard look and tried to preserve our rural areas, tried to make sure that we are distinguishing between rural and urban. In fact, the county removed about 1,300 acres from the urban growth area as areas that were still rural in nature and we didn't need to accommodate future growth. So we are working very hard to protect our last great places and save them for farming and resource uses. At the same time, in the urban areas, we increased capacity for additional housing units by 250,000 units. So we know we don't need those 1,300 acres because we can still put them lots of other places. And for context, our growth target in unincorporated Pierce County is 32,000 housing units. So that difference between 250,000 and 32,000 is our way of creating a lot of different opportunities for the development community to come in different places and different styles of development. And of course, the majority of that development capacity is within potential annexation areas to our 23 cities and towns. And we are working very hard to make sure that whatever we do matches with our local cities. So for context, for example, our cottage housing regulations, we worked very hard to make sure it matches up with the 11 cities and towns that do have cottage housing regulations. Last week, our council passed childcare regulations that follow suit with Senate Bill 5509, essentially said that all cities had to allow housing by right except of industrial areas. We followed suit and did that for the entirety of the urban part of the county. So thinking very hard about how do we make sure that potential annexation areas look and feel like the cities that they're supposed to be part of someday. We have a number of large annexation areas. Jill alluded to this. There's lots of tiny little things that happen. We're trying to play in a slightly bigger sphere at the moment. So I'll point out Gig Harbor and Sumner today and show just this map of the city of Gig Harbor. We're actively working with Gig Harbor on an interlocal agreement. We're thinking through a phased approach, think 2, 5, 10, 15 years as we go along here. Within that, the idea is that all these potential annexation areas really should look and feel a whole lot more like the city than the county. And we frankly are being very open to them to say, what do you want? And we'll make that happen. Specifically, what this means is that we are trying to accommodate them, the city, conducting permit reviews to their standards, to their potential zoning in these locations. And we will be the intermediary in the meantime until such a time as these lands are annexed. So they will collect their own permit fees, they will collect the impact fees, they will allow for development to their standards. We will still accept the permit at our permit counters and allow them to pass through, but this is our way to accommodate the city having development happen at its border in their future annexation areas. That is exactly what the city wishes for. On the other end of things, we are working in South Hill on a potential incorporation. South Hill, just south of Puyallup, is a community of 80,000 people. It would be the second largest city in Pierce County if they chose to incorporate. With 80,000 people, incorporation is really, really difficult. And this is a place that I don't think you need a big study to tell you that this would pencil out. If you found yourself somewhere along Meridian, State Route 161 in South Hill, you'd see enough commercial activity and enough housing there to know that this could very much be a big city. The problem the community is faced with, and we are faced with, is it's very difficult to get incorporation to move. It would require 10% of valid voters. With 80,000 people, 50,000 or so registered voters. That takes 5,000 valid signatures. And it's wholly inappropriate for us as a county to participate in that effort. So it would take a large community group to just get to the point where they can gather enough signatures. That's what Senate Bill 6181 would have addressed last year by providing us with a councilmatic approach for our council, not to take the vote away from the people, just to get the vote to the people so they could consider it in the first place. In the meantime, we're working on a community plan for this area to try to get community energized, and well, frankly, a community of 80,000 people deserves a plan. We are trying as hard as we can to provide neutral and factual information about what incorporation and annexation actually would mean for them. So I'll just wrap up with some challenges for us. Top among things is consistency with cities. There was a bill last session about making zoning match up between the cities and the county adopting the city's zoning code within these potential annexation areas. We absolutely support the intent of that, and that is exactly why we are working with Gig Harbor and with Sumner right now to allow them to do their own permitting work within these potential annexation areas. It would be exceptionally difficult for our development services current planner staff to understand not only our county code, but the code of 23 additional cities and towns in order for us to review to all the different standards. Back in 2006, there was a Senate bill that provided some funding to facilitate incorporations and annexation happening. I am not here to suggest that we need more money, but of course money does help. And the biggest barriers, especially in South Hill for us, is funding for large-scale transportation projects that are missing and are necessary. That would be a huge deficit for a future city if they had to take those projects on for themselves. And finally, I'll wrap up with leave you with something that's easier to fix. There's a census requirement for annexation where in 2026, as good as we've gotten with data, it does not matter what OFM's data says or does. It does not matter how recent the decennial census came. We still need to go door to door and figure out how many people live in a potential annexation area. No big deal when you're dealing with a few parcels. A real big deal when you're dealing with 80,000 people or even a community of 5,000 people. So if there was a way for us to still meet the intent of conducting the census but not do it by collecting fresh information, I think we would see a few more annexations move a little bit more quickly. And I will pass it over to Carl.
Thanks, Alon, and thank you, Chair Dewar, members of the committee. Again, Carl Schrader with the Association of Washington Cities. And I thought I'd try to break this into some challenges in three buckets. So we see procedural challenges, cultural challenges, and then financial challenges. And I'll probably spend more time on the financial ones. But, you know, procedurally, you heard a few of the comments from Alon and Jill before him that, you know, we do have a number of different methods. Each of them have their positives and negative attributes. In particular, one of the benefits of the interlocal agreement methods has been that once a decision is made, it is not subject to referendum, so it is final. And as you look at the election method, for instance, or I should say the petition method and some of these other ones, ultimately there's an opportunity for people to secure enough signatures to put a referendum on the ballot to undo that annexation. And so that creates a disincentive to utilize those tools, obviously, because you have to do a lot of studies and upfront work and other things to build support and then potentially have it not happen. As Alon mentioned as well, given that we cannot spend public dollars to support ballot measures, to support annexations, it becomes very difficult to see them pass in that election method. So you have seen more and more utilization of those interlocal methods. One of the the one that mentioned the coordination with special purpose districts illustrates another kind of challenge with annexations is you will frequently have represented union labor in fire districts that are serving in unincorporated areas. If they get annexed into a city that has a city fire district or city fire department, there's issues with how do you align staffing and seniority and a variety of other challenges that can create opposition, frankly, to annexations. You know, we heard about the contiguous requirements for some of these island methods and other things that do take potential annexations off the table just because they don't meet the technical test. And we definitely agree with the idea that we could move into the future with this surveying issue that's been a barrier to Bonnie Lake, for instance, annexing. And we have had some initial conversations with OFM's demographer's office, and I think there's an opportunity to continue those conversations and make a little bit of progress there. On the cultural side, I think, you know, one of the things that I've observed and heard over the years is there's definitely a feeling in some cases that people do or don't want to be part of a city. Some folks just like to be part of the county. In other cases, they may not actually be in the city, but they, for all intents and purposes, believe they are. Their address says they are. And so there's not really an incentive to try to join in that case. The other cultural thing I guess I would put in the cultural bucket, even though it's a financial one, is it's very difficult to convince someone that their taxes will go down if they're in a city, even if that might be the case. And so, for instance, we would have situations where cities are serving as contract police service in unincorporated areas and, you know, charging a premium for that because they're serving outside of their boundaries. And so if that part of the community came in, they would actually see less cost for police service. But it's very difficult to convince people of that. And that's a big piece in terms of people's degree of support for annexations is their belief on how that will affect their tax bills, and that's understandable, of course. And that, I guess, brings me to the financial challenges, and I would say that's probably the number one reason you're not seeing large-scale annexations like Alana's talked about Pierce County's aim for. And it really comes down to the fact that residential areas are generally seen as not paying for themselves in terms of their service costs. So I mentioned police, fire. You know, we have to extend sewer and provide sewer services in these urban areas, usually higher expectation of sidewalks and transportation and transit access and things like that. For an urban area, those are not able to be paid for just by property taxes from residential development. And so you will see controversy and conflict between cities and counties as we look to, as cities annex areas, we would like to see those be self-sufficient and bring in commercially generating areas. Counties are in difficult financial situations and don't want to see those areas leave their tax base either. And that's been, I think, one of the benefits of the interlocal methods is it provides that structured opportunity to discuss those sorts of revenue sharing opportunities or financial realities to help identify a solvent approach that will work for everyone. That's why you saw the extension of the annexation sales tax credit a few years ago at the urging of the city of Vancouver and others, which provides an opportunity for cities to adopt depending on the size of the annexed area, 0.1 or a 0.2 cent sales tax that is credited against the sales tax collected by the state. So the taxpayer doesn't pay any more, but a portion of state sales tax goes to the city to support the increased cost of providing municipal services in the newly annexed area. Those are the sorts of tools we would love to continue to explore. I know obviously we're not in the budget situation where that's a short-term conversation, but you know, the reality of the GMA is that it expects cities to annex these areas over a 20-year planning horizon, but because of some of these conflicts and challenges that we're talking about, it's not likely to happen in that the scale that we would like to see. And to conclude, the reason why that's important is that it is hard to meet the goals of the state in terms of climate and housing and mobility by promoting and continuing to promote lower density development outside of city limits. So I think it's important for the state to figure out how to move forward on this, but there are a lot of legitimate reasons why we're having problems.
Thank you. I think that's why we're having this work session, because it's pretty obvious that the current system is not ideal. Did someone have a question? it was mentioned that someone had a question earlier, but I don't see a hand. Janice, Representative Zahn.
Yeah, I had a question because earlier there was a slide that talked about when an area is annexed, there's no residential zoning changes for 5 years. So I wanted to better understand what the genesis of that was, and is that creating some challenges?
That is one of the methods, the interlocal agreement methods that was adopted, I believe, in 2020. So there's the two that I highlighted on that slide, and they both come with very specific preconditions to using that method. And I don't know if, Carl, you might be aware, but I don't know the genesis of why they have that 5-year window of no residential zoning changes. I don't know if it's to buy some support from people who are in the potential annexation area so they don't feel like things will drastically change once they're part of a city, but yeah. I don't know the legislative history behind that.
My recollection was that Representative Zahn, that this was in an era where there was a desire to make sure that if the land came in, it would not be downzoned. So sort of a desire to make sure that development capacity was not inadvertently reduced as a result of that annexation.
Okay, Ranking Member Clicker. And then that'll be the last question so we can stay on time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think one of the questions, something that's a concern, at least in my neck of the woods and some of eastern Washington, so we're running into annexations or the possibility of annexations, but there's a lot of pressure from community members, a lot of the NIMBYs. Is there any thought going into the idea of taking the pressure off of some of our, let's say, city council members, some of the people making those decisions, and going to something such as a hearing examiner, somebody that would be out of that personal effect? Or have you heard any of the conversation regarding that? Any one of you?
Representative Clicker, this is Carl with AWC. I have not, and I think one of the features that Jill highlighted was the fact that all of these methods that currently require some sort of legislative approval from the city that would be taking on the territory. And I would hazard a guess that part of the reason why that's important is you're taking on financial obligations and infrastructure liability and long-term costs that ultimately the represented body of the community that's going to have to bear that bill should have a say. I think that's the genesis for that. And we'd be open to conversation, but I think that's probably where we would start out.
Right. Just to follow up, Madam Chair, just on that, thank you, Carl, is what we're seeing in some of these places. You're starting to see so many lawsuits. You saw the city of Cle Elum now have to file bankruptcy because of a $20+ million lawsuit. The city of Walla Walla is being sued for the same type of situation. So this is something that do we need to try to alleviate or move ourselves away from that and looking some other directions so we're not seeing some of those financial situations maybe knocking on our door. That's I'm done after that. Thank you.
Thank you. I like your thinking, Ranking Member Clicker. I think, yeah, that's the challenge. I know several of the challenges brought up by Carl I experienced in my time on Bothell City Council. I did want to applaud Pierce County. I was relieved to hear that you're actually talking about infrastructure and having cities permit so that they don't adopt or annex infrastructure issues, because that's a big barrier. I think there's a lot here to unpack, and I'm interested in what possible solutions there are. And I personally was thinking, what could we have like a density sort of trigger or something along those lines? But interested in hearing people's ideas. I'd love to explore this further outside of a work session. So if you have ideas or thoughts, please send them to the committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to